Well, for the one person who probably doesn't know me, I'm Councillor Heather Fletcher. I'm a councillor in Salford City Council. I used to be in the legal profession, and I've always lived in and around Greater Manchester, apart from 3 years at Birmingham University. And I've been the co-chair of the Muslim Jewish Forum for the past 6 years. And I've been on the committee since our inception, which was 15.5 years ago. So that's a little introduction to me. But more importantly, it's my duty tonight to introduce the speakers and let you know about them, because they're the people that are making it happen tonight. The first speaker is Mr. Jeremy Crane. Mr. Crane is a consultant transplant and vascular surgeon based in London. He's an honorary senior lecturer and lead for education and training in transplant and vascular access surgery at Imperial College Healthcare NHS Trust. Mr. Crane qualified from Liverpool University in 1997. He completed house jobs in hospitals in Liverpool, London and Manchester. He underwent higher surgical training in Northwest London, completing vascular surgery training and specialist transplantation surgery training. In between basic and higher surgical training, Mr. Crane undertook a postgraduate degree at Imperial and St Mary's Hospital. He was awarded a doctorate of medicine from the University of London for his thesis on something complicated, but a thesis on his specialist subject, we'll say. Mr. Crane was appointed as a consultant vascular and transplant surgeon at Imperial College Healthcare NHS Trust in 2011, mainly based at Hammersmith Hospital in London. His specialist interests include kidney and pancreatic transplantation surgery in both deceased and live donors, and vascular access surgery. Mr. Crane, or Jeremy, as I've heard him called many years, he hails from Prestwich, round here. His dad and my dad were extremely good friends. In fact, I always think of Jeremy's dad as being the son that my dad never had. He was very, very close. Jeremy is a very keen sportsman and enjoys outdoor activities. He has an exceptional CV, as I've just read out. However, unfortunately, there is one blot on his otherwise impressive CV, and that is he's a Manchester United supporter. But everybody, I suppose, has one fault. Anyway, I'm sure that all his good points will outweigh that one. So over to you, Jeremy.
That's a really beautiful introduction. I feel quite privileged. So thank you so much. I remember your late father very fondly, actually, over many years. So thank you for asking me to speak this evening. I think this is a really great initiative, and it's from evenings like this that we can move forward with these all-important conversations with our loved ones. And I'm sure we're going to talk more about that a bit later on. Okay, so I work at the Hammersmith Hospital, so it's a transplant unit in London. There's 5 transplant units in London. There's about between 10 and 15 or so in the UK. We have the biggest population of dialysis patients. So those are the patients that need and are waiting for a kidney transplant. And the reason that we talk about kidney transplant when it comes to transplantation is that of all solid organ transplants like heart and lung and liver, pancreas, kidney, etc., kidney transplantation makes up about 80% of that. So from that perspective, we mostly talk about kidney transplantation. We have about 1,600 patients on dialysis, and we also have about 600 or so on our waiting list for a kidney transplant, which is the biggest waiting list in the country. So that makes our unit incredibly busy. We have a huge sort of South Asian population, so a huge BAME population. So that makes us extremely busy because lots of these patients, as we're going to talk about, have things like diabetes and hypertension, and it makes them prone to chronic kidney disease, and therefore they need a transplant. So, so we're based in West London, and I also do pancreas transplantation, which is quite a rare transplant, but it's a cure for not for pancreatic cancer, which everyone thinks, but it's a cure for diabetes. So what we often do is a combined, what we call an SPK, which is a simultaneous pancreas and kidney transplant. So about 90% of pancreas transplants are transplanted with a kidney. And in that situation, a patient that has lots of complications of diabetes, including kidney failure, will have their diabetes cured, and they come off dialysis in one fell swoop. So that's a fantastic operation. So that's a bit of background about me, and moving on to the kind of questions that Amin was keen that I talk about. So how serious are the medical needs for transplant? So in the UK, there are more than 6,000 people waiting for a transplant, and there are never enough donors. And there are two types of donors for kidney transplant, and they are live donors and deceased donors. And live donors are someone that offers a kidney to a loved one, a relative, a friend, and they make up about 30% or so of all the transplants that we do. That's a live donor. But the rest are deceased donor transplants. So in other words, a kidney or an organ that comes from someone that's passed away. And so what we are desperately trying to do in this country is increase the amount of deceased donor transplantation that occurs. There's nowhere near enough. We have to try and bring that waiting list down, because on average, one person a day dies from not getting that all-important transplant. So we're really driving forward to try and decrease the numbers on that transplant list. So this is, and I think this is the thrust of this talk tonight, is talking about deceased donor transplantation. So there are two types within that area of deceased donor. There's a DCD and DBD, and you'll see these terms brandished about, and they're actually quite important. And particularly when it comes to religious and ethical issues, often these two are categorized. And what it means is there are, and it's a little bit macabre, and it's not the nicest topic to talk about. However, it's important to mention this. There's donation after brain death. So in that situation, there's a patient, for example, an intensive care unit somewhere, and they've had a catastrophic brain injury, whether it be trauma, whether it be an aneurysm of the brain or a bleed. And what that means is that the brain function is irrecoverable. It's impossible for them to have any life after that. So essentially, they are being kept alive by a life support machine. And these donors make up about roughly 50 to 60% of all donors, probably about 60%. And when we take their organs, it's in a much more controlled situation. So they go into the anaesthetic room, from there into the operating theatre, and with an anaesthetist, and we very calmly put pipes into the great vessels with cold, what we call perfusion fluid, and we flush all this through the organs that we want to take, and it's done in a very controlled manner, and the deceased donor passes away then. Then we have something called DCD, which is donation after circulatory death. This is a little bit more complex in a way. And what happens in this situation is a patient that has an irrecoverable medical situation, whether it's heart, whether it's lung, and it's futile. So there's no chance they're going to get better from what's going on with them. And what we do with those donors is we take them to the anaesthetic room and we withdraw all treatment. So it's done in a very controlled way. We withdraw all treatment, and usually their family are there with them. And we wait to see what happens. So all the life support medications and such like are taken away. And what normally happens, probably about 50% of the time, is they pass away within an hour. And in that situation, we then very swiftly, we leave a bit of a stand down time once they've passed away. Then we swiftly take them into the anaesthetic room, and we cannulate and put pipes into the main arteries, and do what we were doing with the donation after brain death, but in a much more, very swift way. And due to the nuances of this, in some occasions, the kidneys and other organs aren't as good quality. This is particularly pertinent to the liver. So those are the two types of donation. So when, so we're now going to come on to our next topic, okay? So which is about the opt-out. So what does that all mean? So in May 2020, the law was changed from an opt-in to an opt-out. And it's called Max and Cllr's law because there was a young girl who sadly passed away in 2017 called Cllr, and this young boy, Max, received her heart. And in fact, 2 of her kidneys went to 2 adults. And through campaigning from Max's family and through pressure groups and such like, there's been this huge change from the opt-in to opt-out. And it's called Max and Cllr's law because originally it was called Max's law, and a very magnanimous and quite poignant gesture from the family, they changed it to Max and Cllr's law, which is a beautiful thing. So that came into effect in 2020. And what that means is that everyone that passes away who is in a situation where they can be eligible to be an organ donor is an organ donor. So you have to, unlike before where you had to opt in to say you wanted to be an organ donor, now you have to opt out. Now, the purpose of this, as I said before, is to increase the amount of organs to go around. We're short of organs. Now, what it doesn't mean is the conspiracy theories and the fake news and the myths that sort of promulgate on social media and WhatsApp groups that the state and the government own your organs and you're not in control of them. It's all down to the doctors can do what they want. It doesn't mean anything like that whatsoever. Ultimately, and in some ways, the principles haven't really changed because it's always the family that has the final word. So if someone passes away and they're in intensive care units and they're eligible to be an organ donor, then specialist nurses for organ donation, what we call a SNOD, a specialist nurse for organ donation, approaches the family of the patient in a very gentle, in a very appropriate way. And it's then down to the family. Now, some families say no. And we know that within the BAME communities, which is why this talk tonight is so pertinent, the answer of no is actually much higher than white people. And that's something that we really need to tackle. And so the family is always involved in these very difficult decisions. And that's something that people don't quite realize because they feel that their voice is not heard at the time when something like this happens. But just to put it into perspective, there are 66 million people in the UK, and only a tiny percentage of those people die each year to be able for them to give an organ. So we're talking tiny numbers. But when it happens, it's very important. So if we all, you know, we're all, as I say, we're in the system, okay? But remember also at the same time, you can express your wishes through the organ donor register. And if there are particular nuances, religious nuances, or you don't want certain organs being taken, it can all be registered officially on the organ donor register. But the important thing is at that time, at that very sad time, it's very important that your relatives know what you want. Because if they know what you want, it's going to make life much easier for the family, for the doctors, for the organ transplantation team. So this is a really important point. And if there's one thing, one take-home message that I could say after this talk this evening, we're going to hear a lot of clever people talking about these sorts of religious and ethical nuances, is to tell your families what you would like. It's extremely important. Okay, so the other thing I'd like to talk about very briefly is the BAME issue, so Black and Asian minority ethnic communities. And they, the BAME communities make up a disproportionate amount of the transplant list, so those wanting a kidney compared with their numbers in the actual population. And I said before, that's often to do with things like diabetes, hypertension, genetic issues. But the unfortunate event is that those BAME communities are least likely to give an organ. And we are working really hard on that. And actually those numbers have increased recently, but nowhere near enough. So there's also a very high decline rate when a person from a BAME background is eligible to give a kidney. For example, they're on an intensive care unit, and the specialist nurses approach the family, and the answer is often no, much more so than the rest of the population. So we have to really work on that, and that's really important. And that's why evenings like this are so crucial in trying to drive forward the numbers of organs that we can use for our patients. So, so I think I've said quite a few things. I could talk for hours and hours on this and bore everyone, but I think that I've given you a bit of a background there. And Heather, you might want to move on to the next speaker, but and I know that there's a question being brought in from emails and such like. If anyone wants to ask any questions, then I'm going to be here to answer those questions.